The anticipation continues to build in the state of Alabama as the Crimson Tide and Tigers prepare for the 2024 season. Helping us break it all down, she's been on the scene at both fall camps, knows these teams as good as anyone in the industry. Emily Grace McWhorter of the Next Round. Those guys do fantastic work. And Emily Grace, you probably know her better as EG if you follow along with her work and you're tuning to this show. EG, what's going on? Appreciate you taking the time.
Absolutely. I'm so happy to be here. Like you said, I have been putting a few miles on my car as I have traveled from Auburn to Tuscaloosa to Auburn, and some UAB thrown in there. And I think Troy is actually coming up in the next few weeks.
You're making your rounds across the state of Alabama. I have to ask, EG, I see you address this a lot on social media. I know, again, you're going into your second season, so you've had some time, obviously, to establish yourself. But how do you juggle between the Bama and the Auburn folks and making sure you're staying down the middle? Obviously, you're a Georgia Southern grad, which go Eagles, but, people in that state, they want you to choose one side or the other, it feels like.
They do. And as you said, I clarify it quite often. I actually think it helps me do my job a little better, if you will, because as I like to say, my side is in Statesboro, Georgia, at Georgia Southern. Gotta go Eagles, the whole 9 yards. But I do have a respect for both of these teams. I'm from Georgia, from Atlanta, and so I actually grew up a Georgia fan, but as I like to say as well, I've been cleansed of that. So I really do fall neutral on the Auburn, Alabama, but you'd be surprised how many times I'm asked almost weekly, so do you like Alabama better? Do you like Auburn better? Come on, you want to be here more. But as I say, my side is in Statesboro.
They're never going to let you live it down for sure. Let's start with the Alabama Crimson Tide, EG. I'm curious what you've seen from them. Obviously, again, we're sitting at the time of recording this 2 weeks away or so from kickoff. It's a new era in Tuscaloosa. Everything's different, right? I mean, I recall back, and I'm sure you guys obviously back in the spring, people were making a deal of music being played at practice, and like that was a huge thing. So when we're talking about stuff like that, you realize it's a different era. Through this point in fall camp, what's the vibe around Tuscaloosa? What's the vibe around that Alabama program? It feels like a season in which there hasn't been this much doubt and this many questions surrounding the Crimson Tide, probably since Nick Saban's first season.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. There's a lot of questions because there's a lot of unknown. You have a coach for over 17 years, and you start to kind of get familiar with his practices, how things are run. You also win some national championships in there, some SEC championships, and you get pretty comfortable. Something about Kalen DeBoer, though, is that he has the same foundation as Nick Saban, in my opinion. The hard work, the dedication, the process is still at Alabama. That has not changed. Now, his presentation is a lot different, right? We've seen that since his initial press conference back in January. There's a different aura about him, and I think that it's a good thing. One thing that has been brought up a lot is practice, just the energy there. And I have been to quite a few now. So we actually have one more open viewing window for media. That'll be next Wednesday. So we really are coming down to the wire of the season is almost here. And there's a lot more accessibility. So what I mean by that is they're very willing to talk about players, talk about specifics. And I actually have some fun things planned today in Tuscaloosa with some members of the training staff, the strength and conditioning staff. So you're hearing from people that you don't normally hear from when Coach Saban was there. I think that this team is very excited. I think there's a lot of talent that we've seen, wide receiver, Jalen Milroe entering now his second season. And this is the first time he's really being seen as the true leader, right? This time a year ago, there were questions, who would the starting quarterback be? Then you have the USF game and there's more questions, but it seems like Jalen Milroe has risen to the occasion along with some other players because they didn't have to come back. Imagine January, your coach retires, you have a coaching search taking place after heartbreaking loss to Michigan in the Rose Bowl, but yet all of these players have risen to the occasion. There is some questions about recruiting, in-state, things like that. We can get into that a little later on, but I think that Alabama is in a good spot right now. You mentioned the music. The music is cracking me up because it is not the music that you would expect to hear. It is the oldies. And I do love 70s music, fun fact. So I feel like I'm really familiar with what's being played. But we have like Get Down on It, Billie Jean, Michael Jackson, some Thunderstruck. It's not the classic practice music, but I've really enjoyed my time down there. And it feels really good going into those practices. Our viewing window, I guess that was 2 days ago, was a little shorter. And I think that's going to be kind of customary going forward, that as the season nears, things are going to tighten up, right? We usually get 4 viewing periods of practice. It was cut down to 3, but I like to focus on position players and kind of just seeing what everyone's doing. But in true Nick Saban fashion, you're not going to get too much out of it.
EG, you mentioned Jalen Milroe. I want to stick on the offensive side of the football. We know about him and what he's capable of. I think Jalen plays to his full potential, potentially could win the Heisman Trophy. The question is, who's he going to be throwing the football to? Obviously, Jeremy Bernard coming over from Washington was big, but Ryan Williams seems to be the guy who is stealing the headlines, stealing the show. I've seen a lot of chatter about him on social media. Thoughts on him and maybe some of the other offensive weapons that Jalen Milroe is going to have at his disposal?
Yeah, for sure. Ryan Williams, he's one of those receivers that is getting a lot of headlines. There's a lot of similar receivers like him down at Auburn that we'll get to in a moment. But I did ask Coach Womack Coach Sheridan about Ryan Williams and just kind of what they're expecting from him. And the biggest thing for him is that he has to get the fundamentals down, right? They know the big plays will come, but they have to get those I don't want to say easier, but the basics. Because think about this. He was supposed to be starting his senior year of high school surrounded by kids his own age, going up against guys his own age and younger, and yet he's on the practice field at the University of Alabama. There has to be an adjustment that comes with it, but it sounds like he is adjusting well. He's very coachable. He seems like one of those guys that we may be hearing from, week 3, Wisconsin, and he won't be kind of tucked away from the media like he is now. But throughout fall camp, we have not been able to speak with him, seen him at practice. I actually got a great video. It's over on at Next Round Live of Jalen Milroe and Ryan Williams connecting on a pass, and it's pretty special to watch him.
EG, other side of the ball in Tuscaloosa, I want to zero in on Kane Womack. This is a dude, again, see him on the timeline all the time. We made a big deal by him wearing a hoodie in 100-degree weather, which, I mean, is a big deal, right? I saw him talking about it yesterday. Even it's like we've been talking about this for 2 weeks. But, I feel like for this Alabama football team and this program, I would venture to say there's more questions defensively because Nick Saban was always the mastermind on that side. And you've heard people, chattering in the media, what have you, about Alabama's going to have to outscore people this year. They have questions in the secondary. Your takeaways from Kane Womack and just the overall defensive product, what are their concerns? What do they feel confident about at this point in fall camp?
Yeah, so after the scrimmage, the biggest point of emphasis was tackling. He said it was just okay, but what they were able to do was adjust to the offense early on, and the offense did really well early on in that scrimmage. So it was close to the media, but I asked him actually 2 days ago initial thoughts, and that's what he gave me. He is intense. He is a player's coach, and that team loves him. Think about this. He's coming from South Alabama, a head coaching position, to take a defensive coordinator position. That is becoming a little more common practice as we're seeing, but there was a relationship prior to Alabama between Coach Womack and Coach DeBoer, and so they were able to utilize that to really create an environment that is intense, excellence is demanded. And if you're wondering if hats are still being thrown at fall camp, it is not Kalen DeBoer I've seen. It is Coach Womack. But the standard for the defense is very high. And I think that one thing under this new swarm defense that he is known for is there's been some adjustments. LT Overton, for example, the defensive lineman that came from Texas A&M, I asked him what has been like learning under Coach Womack. He said at first it was crazy. There was a lot of stuff he needed to unpack, and he did his hands like this. There was this much stuff. Now that it's been simplified, I think the strength will be playing fast and playing really free. Deontay Lawson said that this defense is built for an inside linebacker, which is great to hear. He said that he can really be a football player, but there's also the secondary. And Nick Saban did say that is his main concern because it's just a lot of young guys in that room. And they're going to have to rely on those guys to step up, the Xavier Browns. And they haven't had to do that yet. So I think that is the biggest point of concern for Alabama's defense is how that secondary is going to adjust. And then for Coach Womack, he does want to see that tackling improve from scrimmage 1 to scrimmage 2.
Yeah, EG, back to LT Overton really quickly. I think the quote I saw from Kane Womack was he called him a 280-pound ass kicker. So that's
Yes.
always good news to get that kind of guy on your defense. Before we get off of Bama, EG, switch things to the Plains. Anyone that you've seen in fall camp that has stood out to you, impressed you, that maybe isn't a headliner name, not a Ryan Williams, not a Jalen Milroe? Has there been anyone that's flashed that I know you take notes. I saw you at SEC Media Days with your notepad. Anybody that jumped out?
So Jalen Mbakwe is that for me, DB, and I saw him during spring, and he was very highly touted coming in. But it sounds like he has been one of those guys that has risen to the occasion. There's been high praise across the board. Another defensive guy, Yanze Pierre. And we don't really hear much about him, but he's also someone that I've kept my eye on. Keanu Coates, Jamarian Latham, those are more guys that you hear from. Malachi Moore. And this isn't necessarily a shock because we heard about him last season, but Deontay Lawson also described him as a quarterback of the defense. And that right there to me shows the leadership that defense has in a position of questioning where people really don't know what to expect. And an example of that too is Coach Saban primarily stayed with the DBs at practice. That tells you everything you need to know about what his defensive mindset was. Kalen DeBoer, on the other hand, he goes to each position group, spends time with each play, each drill, trying to really get familiar. I've even seen him in there with a hit stick as well as doing some blocking in the quarterback drills. So that right there shows you the difference between what kind of the focal point is from a head coaching perspective. Not saying that Coach Saban didn't focus on other facets of the practice, but he was known for sitting behind those DBs. So I think that right there shows you the difference in this season. But then you have guys like Kane Womack and people that really want to see excellence from this defense. And then they're having to adjust to this swarm. It's not easy, but it sounds like things are going pretty smooth as they can be from a transition like this.
EG, let's go down to the Plains. Hugh Freeze and the Auburn Tigers gearing up for what feels like a pretty big year two, taking a step forward or looking to do so at least. You mentioned the wide receiver position. Cam Coleman is the guy since spring. I mean, EG, talking to Auburn folks, they believe he's going to be the best wide receiver in school history when it's all said and done, assuming he stays healthy. So you've got pretty high expectations for a young kid. You've got him, Perry Thompson, Keandre Lambert-Smith. What's the excitement level there at fall camp and around Auburn for the wide receiver position specifically?
It is insane. That wide receiver position is exciting. I was down there 2 weeks ago now, and they are just fun to watch. I set up right on the back of the end zone and just saw passes being aired out to them, whether they were making adjustments on the fly. Now, granted, this is all against air. I can hear the Alabama fans now. But listen, they are talented. Like the Ryan Williams at Alabama, the fundamentals do need to come first with them as well. You're seeing a lot of young talent in these positions, and that's kind of unusual. But think about this too. Auburn really hasn't had a wide receiver in a really long time. I want you to also think about this. Payton Thorne, there's a lot of questions about him. When he has weapons around him, like we saw at Michigan State, he can be really good. Hugh Freeze and co. are bringing those weapons at Auburn, and they are just genuinely fun to watch. And I think that it's going to be a really fun season seeing how Payton Thorne can connect with those guys along with some other pieces all kind of coming together on the Plains.
Jarquez Hunter at running back as well will assist Payton Thorne, but I want to zero in EG on Payton Thorne. Listen, I'm admittedly skeptical of Payton Thorne. I need to hear something. Is there a positive report coming out of camp? I know it's hard to tell. You can't draw conclusions. Like you said, I would argue no SEC team upgraded their weapons around the quarterback this offseason more than Auburn did. So, again, reports regarding Payton Thorne, what you've seen from Payton Thorne, I mean, are there reasons to believe, are there reasons to build some optimism and confidence that Payton Thorne is going to be significantly better than what he was last year? Because it wasn't like he was bottom of the barrel, right? We got to take a big step forward in year two. So thoughts on Payton Thorne, again, the way they're talking about him at fall camp, and specifically what you have seen from him.
Yeah, so Payton Thorne, you hit the nail on the head. Questions, he has to improve. He has to progress in year two because Hugh Freeze did not go to the portal. I think that was a storyline, especially in the spring, that some people were expecting them to go shopping for a quarterback. They didn't. One thing I asked Payton Thorne at SEC Media Days, I said, listen, it was no secret that after the bowl game, Hugh Freeze was very clear that the quarterback position in Payton Thorne is wide open. Now, fully bought into Payton Thorne and what he offers. What's changed? And it was kind of a nuanced question because I think the biggest thing is the people around him, as well as the coaching staff, have improved from year one to year two. I think my biggest takeaway, and this does apply to Payton Thorne for Auburn, is there's so much continuity and like-mindedness on the staff. And it was no secret last season that was lacking, especially from an offensive play calling position. I asked Derek Nix, how has he seen Payton Thorne progress just this spring until fall, now heading into the season? He said there's a difference in his sense of urgency. And he just has a quiet confidence about him. When I asked Payton Thorne what has changed about himself, he laughed and he said, I really don't know. I'm just still doing what I'm doing. And I think that's really true. He himself doesn't view that he has changed much. He is still showing up to practice. He's still leading that team. But what's happened around him is that he's gotten weapons on the outside that he can throw to. He's got a great running back room. But the staff itself are really helping him develop. Ken Austin, the quarterback's coach, he is really buying into what he's being taught. And I think that's the biggest difference. So there is a lot of hope to be had, especially in fall camp. Apparently he's been phenomenal. And I think that is something that Auburn fans want to hear, not in the scrimmage. There was some reports of some hesitancy still with him in the pocket and kind of connecting on some of those passes. I think that when it comes to the games, you're almost going to assume that of him a little bit. I think it's going to take a lot for Auburn fans to change their tune, but I think it is really possible just with what they've brought in. But out of fall camp, from what I've seen, the conversations I've had, this is a different guy. And I go back to his time at Michigan State, what he did there with the weapons around him. Now he has that at Auburn, and that's a great thing for Auburn fans like.
EG, both the major schools, the state of Alabama, breaking in new defensive coordinators. DJ Durkin for the Auburn Tigers, and he's got talent to work with. That front seven, I think, is going to be a real problem. Eugene Asante at the linebacker position. Secondary should be a strength with Keontae Scott. What are the reports from Auburn out of fall camp when it comes to defense? Again, it feels like even if there are some early struggles offensively, this defense should be one that can get them through it.
Yeah, I think that we saw last season from Auburn, it was their defense that kept them in games. And I think we saw flashes of how good they could be in the Iron Bowl, of course, against Georgia. Then you have the games like New Mexico State that's like, what is going on? A game I'm actually circling, and people might make fun of me for this, is the Vanderbilt game at Auburn this fall. Why, you may ask, EG? That does not sound like a game I should be watching. Diego Pavia, the quarterback from the New Mexico State game, and a lot of that staff will come back in to Jordan-Hare. Keep it in mind. We'll check back in then because I'm curious to see what happens in that game. But back to the defense. So I think that beginning of fall camp, there's a lot of questions. You mentioned that front seven. They added a lot of depth there, which was needed. It sounds like the defensive woes of how this, secondary is going to perform is easing up, especially as we get further in. Gage Keys is a guy that I'm keeping my eye on. Amon Lane Gaines in the secondary. I think there's a lot of talent there, like you mentioned, and it's adjusting well at this point now, 2 weeks out of the season.
EG, before we get you out of here, you mentioned top of the show about and our friend Mike Gittins, and different folks have talked about this, right, and brought it up. Maybe not so much Alabama folks, but certainly Auburn folks want to bring up the recruiting and the in-state recruiting and is that something I doubt it's really being talked about amongst like the coaches or the players at practice, but is that something when you're at these different places, when you're in Tuscaloosa, when you're in Auburn, like is that something that everyone's well aware of? Like, is that kind of like the elephant in the room, the in-state recruiting dominance, or is it more so something we're making a big deal of? Obviously, it's a big deal, but I think Auburn folks want to make it a really, really big deal. Alabama folks, they don't want to make it such a big deal because Kalen DeBoer is still crushing in recruiting, but, maybe a little bit concerning to be losing the states. I mean, where does that play? Is that something that you've heard chatter about a lot or not really?
So I have an interesting perspective because I actually get to spend time in both places. I get to go down to Auburn and then I get to turn around and go to Tuscaloosa the next day or vice versa. And there's not a lot of people on my side that get to do that. So I really get a firsthand account of what's being said at both places. I think you hit the nail on the head. It's being really hyped up at Auburn. It's being really downplayed at Alabama because I put it as I think that Auburn is downplaying the fact that there's a new coach in town. I think that they are focusing on all the success that Hugh Freeze and his staff are having and kind of ignoring the fact, well, you do need to take into consideration new staff at Alabama. But I think at Alabama, at times, and I think the fans are more doing this, and I think this is similar at Auburn, that you see on Twitter, well, we're not worried about in-state recruiting. Well, we're focusing elsewhere. Well, what does that do for the in-state recruit that's seeing all of this? Now it's coming from the fans. It's not coming from the coaching staff, but fans, as we know, play a big part now in the culture of these programs in the sense of, what is it like when I play in front of 90,000 people? Who's going to be cheering me on? So you go on Twitter and you see, Alabama, I'm not worried about it. You see Auburn, we want you, come on down. You have the sweet tea talks and the front porch discussion kind of vibe. But I think it's interesting, and I'm curious to see how Coach DeBoer adjusts to it. I think when he came in, the biggest question was, can he recruit in the South? Well, you have guys like Kane Womack. Talk about the South, Kane Womack. So you have strengths there. I'm hesitant to say that we're making too big a deal about it. I think with a lot of things when it comes to recruiting, the media sees this much of it all. And no one is for sure until they are in a uniform, in my opinion, and you're seeing them at practice, especially in this day and age. But I think it is a discussion, specifically in the state of Alabama, because then you have to worry about this too. You have the state of Georgia, the next door neighbors. So are you going to spend more time focusing in-state and letting the next door neighbor Georgia kids go elsewhere? Where do you fall on that? But it's interesting, and hearing the conversations between media, between Alabama and Auburn, even on that side of the ball, or not side of the ball, on that side of things, there is competition between the beat writers down there and the beat writers in Tuscaloosa.
Emily Grace McWhorter, next round, does a fantastic job covering all things Bama, Auburn, everything in between. Last thing, EG, I lied. One more. Again, you've been to the Iron Bowl. Last year, you went to that game. As someone who has never been, may potentially this season, that's the game I want to go to. May potentially this season be making the trip to Tuscaloosa to experience it. There's been a lot of chatter this offseason about, Red River has come into play with Texas and OU. Is that a better rivalry? What are your thoughts? Give people an idea who haven't experienced the Iron Bowl what that's all about.
All right, so I've been to the Iron Bowl, and I've been to, I think they're not calling it the largest cocktail party anymore. I think
you can call it that here. That's what we call it. It's fine. Yeah.
So I've been to that rivalry game as well. And also Georgia Southern App State, but those are the two big ones. The Iron Bowl is like nothing I've ever experienced in my professional career and as a fan of sports growing up. It is absolutely insane. That is one of my favorite games I think I will have ever covered when it's all said and done. 4th and 31. Oh my goodness. The environment of Jordan-Hare is scary. We heard about it at SEC Media Days from multiple coaches. When that place gets loud, when you walk in there is something in the air where suddenly Georgia is being played close by Auburn. And Auburn looks like they're about to beat Alabama with a roster that is absolutely stacked. Incredible. If you get a chance, you need to go. I'm excited for the one in Tuscaloosa this year. I do think from what I've gathered, when it's in Jordan-Hare, there's a certain magic about it. There's still magic in Tuscaloosa, but I think we can all agree that stadium, there's something different about it. I remember my first game there working was against Samford. And I walk in, and this is the week after Texas-Bama, my first game with the next round. And I could not believe how loud it was, even for Samford. And this was an afternoon game. The student section is so close to the field as well. The noise level, just the passion of Auburn fans is incredible. Bryant-Denny is a special place too. I absolutely loved splitting my time there. My biggest game that stuck out to me was LSU-Bama and the Tennessee-Bama game this past season. I heard it. I think it got the loudest, and I took a picture of it on the little, what's it called, the decibel chart, and the record for the loudest noise in Bryant-Denny was recorded. And I want to say it was after like Jaden Daniels got sacked, or it might have been Terrion Arnold interception. I'll have to fact check that, but it's on my Twitter somewhere. Craziness. All that to say, if you get a chance, go to the Iron Bowl. You will not regret it. Go to a night game at Bryant-Denny. Go to a game at Auburn. It's just incredible.
Emily Grace McWhorter, the next round, again, does great work. EG, let folks know where they can check out all your work.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can follow me on Twitter at MEG_sports. Follow me on Instagram. It's all pretty much MEG. That's where you can find me. I'm with the Next Round. You can follow us at Next Round Live. And we actually just started 2 new team sites. So Cover Crimson and the Barn Auburn. Join us over there. You can get some more in-depth look. We'd love to have you, but I absolutely love working for this crew. They're great guys. We do a live show 9 to noon. Check us out. We're basically everywhere all the time. So that's a good thing for Auburn and Alabama fans. We try and keep an equal coverage, and I think we do a really good job of that. So again, at MEG Sports, where you can find me. But thank you for having me on. I love doing stuff like this because my background is sideline reporting. So usually I'm the one interviewing people, and it's always fun to get to sit in the interviewee chair.
EG, appreciate you taking the time. We'll definitely do it again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.